If I were to ask you, when do people eat? You would probably answer when they are hungry. But do they really? As it turns out, things are a little bit more complicated than that. As we have learned, indeed our body has many biological mechanisms to regulate hunger and satiety, both in the short and the long term. But these mechanisms are much more effective in protecting us from undereating than they are to protect us from overeating. In fact, the biological regulation of hunger and satiety is not the only regulator of eating behavior. There are many other situations in which we eat even if we are not really hungry. Psychologists would say that eating is not exclusively an unconditioned behavior, but it is also a conditioned one by our environment, our habits, our beliefs, our mood, and so on. For example, many of us eat when it's time. Maybe I'm not hungry, but hey, it's lunchtime. Most people say they're not hungry in the morning, and yet they have breakfast because they have been told they shouldn't skip it. Time of meals is a socially determined behavior. We learn to eat when it's time, though we're not necessarily hungry. And the proof that this is not a biological but a social behavior is that the time of meals is different in different cultures. In Boston, it would be considered normal to have dinner at 5 p.m. In southern Spain, that would be considered a late lunch, 11 p.m. being a more appropriate time for dinner. What's more, the concept of 3 meals a day is an invention of the Industrial Revolution. The ancient Romans, for example, normally ate just 1 large meal a day and considered very unhealthy to eat more frequently than that. The memory of when and how much we have recently eaten also determines our eating behavior. It's 3 p.m. and I haven't been eating since breakfast. I'd better have something now. I only had a yogurt for lunch. I'd better eat a rich dinner. Again, I'm not necessarily hungry, but my concept of what's appropriate drives me to eat. Another factor determining eating behavior is food availability, which stimulates food consumption. In other words, we eat when it's there. It's a primordial instinct because remember, we are designed to accumulate food, and it's often a respondent behavior. The sight or the smell of food triggers our appetite. The food industry knows this very well. Our environment is designed to induce passive overconsumption by exposing us to eating stimuli and opportunities everywhere, from vending machines to advertisement on television. And I'm sure you remember our little walk in New York City. There are 2 situations in which we are even more likely to eat food that's available. One is when we like it. As we already learned, the sight or smell of our favorite food can trigger release of endorphins in our brain that make it irresistible. If we come across our favorite cheesecake, we are likely to eat it even if we are not hungry, and possibly even if we have just had a meal and we're absolutely full. The other situation is when food is offered to us. Many of us find it hard or impolite to decline food when it's offered, even if normally we wouldn't have eaten it. Okay, so far we have identified a few situations in which we may eat even though we are not strictly hungry. We eat because it's time. We eat because we are aware of not having eaten in a while or not enough. We eat because it's there. We eat because we like it, and we eat because it's offered to us. All these eating behavior are not considered disordered eating. We can certainly learn to willingly change these behaviors if we need it to control food intake, but they are otherwise normal eating behaviors, whose regulation is not strictly biological, but mostly psychosocial. Okay, I had a muffin because my colleague tried a new recipe, offered it to me, and I didn't want to disappoint her. Big deal. However, there are other eating behaviors that are indeed more disordered, and these are stress eating, comfort eating, and food addictions. We will examine these disordered eating behaviors in the next video. Disordered eating behaviors are not to be confused with eating disorders, such as anorexia nervosa or bulimia nervosa, which are pathological conditions that we will address in yet another video.